Are you stuck in an endless loop of negative thinking? Are you ruminating over past failures or past decisions that you've made? Do you find yourself unable to move forward and make the decisions that you want because you get stuck in a loop of overthinking, ruminating on what might go wrong? And do you feel like you can't break that habit? Well, in today's episode, we're going to talk about how to overcome that type of thinking and the connection of that type of thinking on our overall happiness and well-being. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Permission to Love podcast. I'm Jerry Henderson. I'm a Master Certified Mindset Coach, host of the Permission to Love podcast, author and speaker, and I work with high achievers to help them have happier, healthier, and more sustainable lives as they achieve their goals. So I want to say thank you for being here and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to invest in yourself, because remember, your relationship with yourself is the most important relationship that you have. So taking this time to invest in yourself is huge. It puts you in a category that very few people are in. So you should be proud of yourself, and I'm so thankful that you're here. Now, we're in the middle of a happiness series about the things that cause us to be happier. A quick review that we've covered in some other episodes is that 50% of our happiness is biological, 10% of our happiness is based on our circumstance, and then 40% of our happiness is based on our daily habits, the routines, and the activities that we engage in that can increase our overall well-being and our happiness. So today, we're going to talk about the impact that rumination has on our overall happiness and how we can begin to shift ourselves away from rumination towards more positive habits and a more positive mindset. Now, as we get started, I want to ask you a favor. If you've not yet had a chance to subscribe or to follow this podcast, take a moment to do that, because that's going to keep you updated on when new episodes come out. And it'd also mean a lot to me if you take a moment to rate and review the podcast, because the more ratings and reviews we get, the more visible the podcast is, and the more likely people are to discover it and learn how to have a healthy relationship with themselves. So let's go ahead and dive into this topic of rumination, and let's start with defining what is rumination. Well, rumination is a very specific type of overthinking where we get stuck in a loop of focusing in on the same distressing thought over and over. These thoughts usually center around things like our mistakes, the problems that we're having, or our perceived shortcomings. And what happens when we get stuck in rumination, it becomes very difficult to find the solutions or to see the ways out because we're stuck in a negativity loop. Psychologist Susan Nolan-Hoeksema, who has done extensive research on rumination, describes it as a kind of comparison of one situation with some unachieved standard that they have. And unlike productive problem solving, rumination doesn't lead to new insights or resolution. It keeps us stuck. It keeps us trapped. And part of the trap of rumination is that we think we're working on the problem. We think that we're trying to find a solution. But one of the markers of rumination is that you're staying stuck and you're never really finding the solution. And we think just thinking about it or reviewing it over and over and over is going to lead us to some type of answers. And yes, it is our brain's way of trying to keep us safe. And yes, there is some part of us that hopes that through thinking it over and over and over, we'll find some different way of approaching the problem or life itself. But the challenge is the way that we're thinking about it, the way that we're approaching it is actually what's keeping us stuck. I love what Albert Einstein once said. He said, "You cannot solve the current problems that you have with the same type of thinking that created the problems that you have." This is the essence of what rumination is. It's a kind of thinking that keeps us stuck instead of being able to move forward. So let's take a little bit of time and talk about what happens when we ruminate. What is its impact on our overall well-being and our happiness? Well, the research shows that rumination is a significant contributor to things like depression and anxiety and an overall lower state of well-being. Nolan-Hoeksema's research showed that people who ruminate are more likely to be depressed and stay in depression longer because they can't seem to find a way out of it. She also noted that when we ruminate and we dwell on negative emotions and negative thoughts, it only intensifies our emotional distress. And there's research that suggests that when we stay stuck in a pattern of rumination, it becomes nearly impossible to experience joy and contentment in our lives. Research by Killingsworth and Gilbert in the Journal of Science found that when people are ruminating, they're less likely to be happy than those who are focused on living in the present moment. And that's one of the challenges with rumination, because when we're ruminating, we're never able to focus in on the present moment, and we start feeling like we're missing out on our entire lives because we're stuck in our head thinking that we're problem solving. But the reality is we're not problem solving. We're just playing the same tape over and over and over. And that's leading to greater levels of anxiety, depression, and a lower state of happiness and well-being. Research also shows that rumination has a clear connection with our overall physical health. Prolonged rumination can manifest in things like headaches, fatigue, and even more serious conditions like heart disease. And I know for myself, what I experienced with my physical health of having a heart attack and open heart surgery was directly related to my overall well-being, the shame that I was carrying, the rumination that I was engaged in day after day. I mean, the fact is, the longer that we stay in the negative thinking of rumination, and the more we're trapped in the loop of that, the more it drains our energy. And it absolutely will diminish our overall quality of life. Because remember, where our attention goes, our energy goes. And where our energy goes, that's what grows in our life. And so as we're sitting there trying to ruminate and problem solve and living through the regrets of the past and somehow subconsciously thinking that we're going to be figuring out how to solve all of that, what we're actually doing is feeding it, giving it more life, giving it the ability to no longer stay in our past or in our future, but what it's doing is it's consuming the present moment, it's consuming our lives. So let's talk about the strategies that we can use to overcome rumination and increase our overall well-being and our happiness. Well, the first step is awareness. Becoming aware of the fact that you're stuck in that pattern, becoming aware of the fact that it's not serving you, even though you think it is. It's not serving you, it's keeping you trapped and it's keeping you stuck. So just becoming aware of that and giving yourself the permission to let go of rumination is a huge thing and the place that we start. And the other thing I want to encourage you on before we go any further and we get into the steps of overcoming rumination is to let you know it is possible. You can move away from the mind that ruminates, that keeps you stuck, that drains your energy, that causes you to live in fear and anxiety. You can overcome it. It is possible. I see it happen all the time with the clients that I work with. Many clients will come to me with that limited, negative, stuck mindset, and they're constantly ruminating over all of their challenges and all of their problems, thinking that they need to do that to figure out how to fix them. And a lot of the work that we'll do in the coaching process is to shift their mind away from that, to help them see how it's not serving them, give them permission to let go of that type of thinking so that they can move to a better type of thinking that is serving them better and feels as safe to them as that habit of rumination has felt for them. So let's talk about the first point of overcoming rumination, which is practicing mindfulness and meditation. I think mindfulness is one of the most powerful tools that we can use to disrupt the negative thinking patterns and the rumination that we're engaging in, because it brings us into the present moment and can disrupt that negative thinking pattern. Jon Kabat-Zinn, one of the founders and pioneers of mindfulness, has shown through his research that mindfulness will reduce overall stress, anxiety, and depression. And one of the ways that it does it is it brings us into the present moment. You see, if you focus in on the present moment, you'll find, for the most part, you're doing okay. We typically start getting stressed and anxious and depressed when we're thinking about the past or we're thinking about the future. But you might say, well, no, I'm trying to figure out a problem that I have right now. Well, I want to ask you, if you start to peel back the layers on your thinking, what are you actually stressed about? For example, if you're having some challenge paying your bills, it's not always the fact that we can't figure out how to pay the bill in the moment. It's what happens when we begin to project into the future of what it's going to mean if we can't pay that bill. And what that can do and what can actually happen is it can keep the creative part of our brain locked down. We're not able to see solutions. We're not able to see our way out of it because we're so focused in on the what might happen instead of the what can happen in this moment. And so shifting ourselves away from our catastrophizing thinking or our thoughts of regret and grounding ourselves in the present moment is a very effective tool to disrupt rumination. And it is also a part of the rewiring of our brains to begin to let go of the rumination. I love what Kabat-Zinn says. He says, you cannot stop the waves, but you can learn to ride them. And mindfulness can help you ride the waves of your thoughts. It can help you step back as an observer to try to understand, why is that thought there? How is it trying to serve me? How can I replace it with a more positive and life-giving thought? And it takes the power out of the thoughts and puts the power back into our own hands. Now, another strategy that we can use to help overcome rumination is things like cognitive behavioral therapy and mindset coaching. And the reason that these things are so powerful is that they allow us to see the way that we're thinking by having our thoughts reflected back to us by someone else. You see, as long as we're stuck in our own head, we can't evaluate the way that we're thinking. And what therapy and coaching does is it gives us somebody to partner with us and helping us reframe our thinking by understanding how we're thinking, and then to begin to develop new thinking patterns. Aaron Beck, the founder of cognitive behavioral therapy, found that simply asking yourself questions like, is this thought helping me or is this thought harming me, can be very powerful techniques to disrupt rumination. Because what it's doing is it's lifting us out of the moment of the thought, and we're beginning to examine the thought. And by simply examining the thought, it can begin to dispel its power over us, or our grip over us in that moment. Now, the third thing you can do is you can use distraction and activity to disrupt the rumination. Research shows that sometimes the best way that you can disrupt a thought is by getting active, doing physical activity. Because what you're doing is you're shifting your brain's focus into that activity. You're using your body, you're taking advantage of the mind-body connection. And this could be as simple as taking a walk, or doing some exercise, or engaging in a hobby that you enjoy. A study published in Psychosomatic Medicine showed that aerobic exercise significantly reduced the intensity of rumination and its negative impact on our overall well-being. Now, physical activity and exercise isn't something you can do because of limitations. Research also says that you can shift your thinking away from rumination by engaging in other activities that stimulate your mind. This can be anything from reading a book or simply doing a crossword puzzle. But whatever you find to be useful, know that distraction and activity are very effective strategies to break the loop of rumination. Now, the fourth thing, which may seem a little strange to you as you listen to this, is to actually set time aside to worry. Because if you're finding it very difficult to stop ruminating, giving yourself space to do it by setting a time on your calendar will allow your brain to relax in the present moment, because it knows it has time later to really worry about it. Now, I would encourage you to keep it time-bound. Limit it to 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or whatever you feel comfortable with. But what we don't want to do is leave it open-ended, because we can go on and on and on. And there's really compelling research by Dr. Borvek and his colleagues that shows when you contain your worries to a specific time in the day, it can reduce their overall impact on your life, because you're not carrying it throughout your entire day. You see, your brain is trying to solve a problem. It keeps bringing it back up. It doesn't feel like it has a solution that makes you feel safe. You're trying to figure something out, and it's wrecking your entire day because you don't have any boundaries around it. So if you'll set a boundary around the time that you allow yourself to do that, it can be really helpful in decreasing rumination throughout your day, but also in your life overall. Because when you keep it contained to a certain time of your day, you're actually breaking the habit of rumination. And you're allowing your brain to do other things, more positive things, and your brain gets more used to that. And you're building new neural pathways and new grooves in your brain that allow your brain to be more comfortable with positive thinking and not with all that negative thinking all the time. So actually try scheduling some time to worry and see what impact it has on your overall tendency to ruminate. Now, the fifth thing is to shift towards positive thinking. And the reason I didn't address this in the beginning as number one is because there's a lot of emerging research that's coming out about how reducing your negative thinking can have a very significant impact on your overall well-being, especially in the beginning, versus simply just trying to do more positive thinking. And this might be the reason why for some of you, just trying to simply do positive thinking isn't working for you, because you're still allowing so much space for those negative thoughts. And if you can start by quieting down the negative thinking by the strategies that we just discussed, and then bring in more positive thinking to replace that negative thinking with, you might begin to see a greater impact from your positive thinking on your overall well-being. So the positive thinking strategy is simply finding some positive thoughts or some positive phrases that you want to use when you find yourself ruminating. And when you get stuck in rumination, disrupt it and then replace it with something that's more life-giving for you. And as you do that over time, your system will get more comfortable with that positive thinking. And you will be changing your mindset to see situations and circumstances from a more positive mind frame instead of such a negative mind frame. Now, with all those things in mind that we just talked about, what I would invite you to do is identify one area that you have a tendency to ruminate over, that you engage in a lot of that negative thinking around. And then I would invite you to actually put a plan in place on how you're going to address that thinking when it shows up in your life using the 5 things that we just discussed. Because a lot of times as we're trying to make change, we get these principles in our head and we become aware of things, but we never take the next step, which is an action plan on how we're going to address it. So if rumination is having a really negative impact in your life and you want to overcome it, you're going to have to do some work at it. And one of the things that you can do to work on it, if you're really serious about it, is to put a tactical plan in place on how you're going to address it. Is it important for you to overcome that thinking? And if it is, why? Why is it so important for you to get rid of that type of thinking in your life? Really take a moment and ground yourself in who the person is that you want to become. And is that type of thinking moving you towards it, or is it keeping you stuck? What is that type of thinking doing to your relationships, to your career, to your mental health? You see, we got to connect with that deeper why that's behind why we say we want to change something. Because sometimes we'll say things like, I want to change it because I don't feel good when I do it, or it makes me feel unhappy, or it's having an impact in my life, but we're not getting really specific. But let me ask you a question just under the surface of, well, it's making me unhappy, or I don't like it. What's happening to your life as a result of it? Who are you becoming? What are you missing out on? How is it affecting your relationships? Let's get into those kind of conversations as we address why we want to change something. There's a strategy about asking why, which is to ask yourself why 7 times about anything that you want to create or that you want to change in your life. So in this scenario, if we were working together in coaching, I'd ask you, why do you want to change that? And you might say something like, well, it depresses me. Okay, so why is not being depressed so important for you? Well, it's kind of keeping me stuck and I don't feel like I'm getting out and enjoying my life. Okay, what about your life do you want to enjoy? Well, I want to enjoy being with my family. I want to have the energy to get out and to do things with my friends. Okay, so why is that so important to you? Well, because I care about them and I really want to develop deep connection and intimacy. Okay, so now why is that important to you? You see, we start to get to some real core values underneath the surface of, well, I don't want to ruminate because I don't like the way that it makes me feel. I hope that makes sense. So as you're thinking about the change that you want to make in this area, connect with that authentic why by identifying what you want to change, why you want to change it, and go deeper and deeper on that why until you feel something inside that moves you. Make an emotional connection as to why you want to make that change, and then that will give you the motivation to start doing the things that we've talked about in this podcast episode. And if you need somebody to help you get to a deeper sense of why and really connect with the changes that you want to make in your life, I encourage you to go to my website, set up a free strategy session, and we can discuss those changes that you want to make, and we can determine together if working together is the right fit for both of us. But please, whatever you do, don't choose to stay stuck. You can have the life that you want. You can identify and begin to create and live out those whys that are so important to you. So take whatever steps you need to take to get yourself unstuck. Well, thank you for taking your time to be here today. And if you do need more resources, you can see the show notes in this episode, or you can go to my website at jerryhenderson.org. And finally, I want to remind you as always that you are worthy of your own love.